TSN continues the United News Marathon. My name is Natalia Ostrovska. Let's begin. Czech President Petr Pavel has called on Nato to show its teeth to Russia in response to repeated attempts by the Kremlin to test the alliance's resolve on the eastern flank. In his speech to journalists from The Guardian, Pavel called for potentially even asymmetric measures against Moscow in response to its provocative behavior. Otherwise, he says, there is a risk that the Kremlin will intensify its actions. The Czech president also expressed some disappointment with the insufficient pressure from the United States on Russia. However, he refrained from criticizing President Trump. At the same time, he emphasized that after the occupation of Crimea in 2014, Moscow studied how NATO operates and, I quote, developed a style of behavior that almost reaches the threshold for invoking Article 5, but always stays just below that level. Petr Pavel noted, Russia understands only the language of force. He suggested that if Russia continues to violate NATO airspace, they will have to shoot down Russian drones or manned aircraft. Explosions in Novorossiysk, Krasnodar Krai. Local authorities reported a drone attack. A large-scale fire broke out in the port area of the city. Traffic near the waterfront was temporarily blocked. Most likely, the Sheshkaris terminal, one of the largest oil complexes in southern Russia, was under attack. It is used for receiving, storing, and loading oil onto tankers. Russian officials stated that technical and administrative buildings caught fire, but eyewitness videos show that the column of black smoke is enormous. There are also reports that after this attack, the Rushova tank farm caught fire as well. It is considered the largest oil storage facility in the Caucasus. More than 1 million tons of petroleum products can be stored there at the same time. A drone flight was also recorded in the Perm region, in the city of Grubaka. After that, something caught fire. There was also panic in Udmurtia. Drones were flying there as well. The distance from the Ukrainian border to the city of Glazov is over 1,000 kilometers. Locals there filmed thick smoke after the fire broke out. And in Jankoy, in temporarily occupied Crimea, there were also strikes. They are reporting a fire on the railway. Evacuation from Oleshki may take place in the near future. This agreement was reached with the Russian side, said the Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets. According to him, this concerns not only Oleshki but also neighboring settlements. Statements from the Ukrainian side about a humanitarian catastrophe on the occupied left bank of the Kherson region have been made since the beginning of March. People are unable to leave their basements and they are critically lacking food and drinking water. One of the proposed evacuation options was to transport people across the Konka River, but from a military standpoint, this method is too dangerous. A preliminary plan was approved to evacuate people to a safe location in territory controlled by Russia, after which our side would take the evacuees to Ukraine.
This concerns not only the evacuation from Oleshki. We have mentioned several settlements. In fact, these are areas surrounding Oleshki. We are talking about the evacuation of approximately 6,000 Ukrainian civilians, including, according to our information, 200 Ukrainian children who are there. As of today, we have discussed all the technical issues. We are waiting for a date from the Russian side for when the process of ceasefire will be initiated and the physical evacuation will begin. We have discussed all the technical details.
Senators from both parties have called on the Pentagon to speed up assistance to Ukraine. Lawmakers have spoken out against delays by the U.S. Department of Defense in providing $600 million in aid to Ukraine and other allies in Eastern Europe. According to the Associated Press, a bipartisan group of senators sent a letter to Pete Hegseth urging him to allocate these funds. In recent weeks, tensions have increased between Congress and the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump. Lawmakers from both parties are demanding clarification regarding the fate of $400 million in aid to Ukraine and another $200 million for defense programs in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. These funds were allocated by Congress last year. In the context of Ukraine, this refers to a $400 million package for the needs of the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which involves the Pentagon purchasing equipment from American defense companies. It is 11 o'clock in Ukraine. I will tell you about the main events at this moment right now. In Kramatorsk, Donetsk region, 4 residents were injured as a result of Russian strikes. 2 people were wounded in Malotaranivka and another person in Druzhkivka. In 5 settlements of the region, homes have been destroyed and administrative buildings and a technical facility have been damaged. In Horokovatka, Kharkiv region, a woman and a man became victims of a Russian strike. Another local resident was wounded. In Kivsharivka, an FPV drone killed a man. There are victims in Petrivka, Zrubenci, Pisky Radkivsky, Slatin and Bohodukiv. After the Shahed drone attack in the Vorozhbianska community in Sumy region, power outages occurred. In Konotop, air quality worsened due to a fire. In total, 13 people were injured in the region over the past day. Explosions were heard around midnight in the Poltava district. UAVs were flying toward it. A fire broke out in an administrative building. The fire has already been extinguished. In Kushuhum, Zaporizhzhia region, the Russians struck with an FPV drone. 1 man was wounded, 1 was killed. And another local resident was injured in Orikhiv. Private houses were damaged in Vilnyansk. In Shakhtarsk, Dnipropetrovsk region, an apartment building was damaged. Rescuers evacuated 20 people, including 5 children. An administrative building was also damaged. In Kryvyi Rih district, a private house was destroyed. At night, the Russians attacked a house in Kherson with a drone. Its resident was killed. Another man did not survive the shelling the day before. In total, 20 civilians were wounded in the Kherson region over the past day. The American military presence in Europe will gradually be reduced, but the United States will remain committed to the principle of NATO's collective defense. With this statement, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio concluded the round of NATO negotiations in Sweden, where the alliance's foreign ministers gathered for 2 days of talks. In Helsingborg, the key topics of discussion were strengthening support for Ukraine and the security situation in the Middle East. This is one of the last ministerial meetings of this level before the alliance leaders gather for an important summit in Ankara in July. And it is the first NATO meeting that Sweden has hosted since joining the alliance in 2024. On the eve of the meeting, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs Andriy Sybiha met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. They discussed the growing threats from Russia to Ukraine and to all of Europe from the territory of Belarus. They agreed that strong collective deterrence is necessary. Just before the NATO ministers' meeting, the Secretary General of the alliance once again stated that he wants European countries to contribute more proportionally to aid for Ukraine under the Pearl program.
The flow of critically important American equipment to Ukraine continues. This includes vital anti-ballistic missile defense support, including for Patriot systems paid for by European allies through the well-known Pearl program. This is ongoing. Europeans are paying for this, but I truly want to successfully accomplish a much more even distribution of the overall collective responsibility. Because right now, only 6 or 7 specific allies are actually carrying the vast majority of the heavy lifting.
Czech President Petr Pavel has called on NATO to show its teeth to Russia in response to repeated attempts by the Kremlin to test the alliance's resolve on the eastern flank. In his speech to journalists from The Guardian, Pavel called for potentially asymmetric measures against Moscow in response to its provocative behavior. Otherwise, he says there is a risk that the Kremlin will intensify its actions. The Czech president also expressed some disappointment at the lack of pressure from the United States on Russia. However, he refrained from criticizing President Trump. At the same time, he emphasized that after the occupation of Crimea in 2014, Moscow studied how NATO operates and, I quote, developed a style of behavior that almost reaches the threshold for invoking Article 5, but always stays just below that level. Petr Pavel noted, Russia understands only the language of force and suggested that if it continues to violate NATO airspace, they will have to shoot down Russian drones or manned aircraft.